He walked through the glass doors of Meridian Automotive on a Tuesday morning. In late September, carrying a 9-year-old girl's hand in one of his and a coffee thermos in the other. And the woman in the navy blazer at the reception podium looked up from her screen and made a decision so quickly that she probably wasn't even aware she'd made it. His name was Reuben Carr. He was 39 years old and had not shaved since Sunday. He was wearing a gray Carhartt jacket over a flannel shirt, work jeans with a tear in the left knee from where he'd caught it on a lift bracket the previous week, and steel-toed boots that had walked through more engine bays than most people would ever see in a lifetime. His hands were the hands of someone who worked with them, scrubbed clean, but still carrying the faint shadow of grease that never quite came out from around the nails no matter how long you washed. He looked like a man who belonged in a garage, which made sense because he owned one. The girl beside him was Clem. Clem Carr, 9 years old, wearing a red quilted vest over a long-sleeved shirt. With a small drawing of a car on it, she'd insisted on picking herself when they stopped at a rest stop on the drive up from Hartwell. She had her late mother's dark eyes and her father's habit of watching things carefully before she decided what she thought about them. She was holding a book about migratory birds that she had not stopped reading since they left the house at 7:30, except for the 20 minutes she'd spent asking Reuben why the highway was built so close to the lake. It was a PD day. Reuben had brought her because there was nobody else to bring her to, and also because she'd asked, and when Clem asked for something, there was a particular quality to it, patient, matter-of-fact, not wheedling, that made him inclined to say yes. "Is this the one?" she said, looking up at the showroom through the glass as they approached. "This is the one," he said. "It looks expensive." "The parts are expensive. That's why we're here." She nodded and went back to her book. Meridian Automotive occupied a long, low building at the north end of Barton's commercial strip. The kind of building designed to look minimal and therefore costly. The showroom floor was all polished concrete and warm track lighting, with 4 vehicles arranged at careful angles, each one a different flavor of the same message. "You have arrived." A receptionist with a headset sat at the front desk. 2 salespeople were visible. One with a couple near the back wall. One who had clocked Reuben the moment he walked in and was now making her way toward him with the kind of professional smile that carries a question inside it. Her name was Blair Ashton. 32 years old, senior sales associate, 18 months at Meridian. She was very good at reading a room, which was a skill she'd been told more than once was her strongest asset. She could size up a customer in the time it took them to cross the showroom floor and direct her energy accordingly. It was not, she believed, a malicious talent. It was efficient. What she saw when she looked at Reuben Carr, the jacket, the boots, the stained thermos, the 9-year-old. What she concluded, wrong building. "Good morning," she said, stopping a few feet from him. "Can I help you find anything?" The phrasing was careful. Not welcome. Not let me show you around. Can I help you find anything? The same way you might say it to someone who appeared to be looking for the washroom. "I'm here to see Douglas Fenn," Reuben said. "He's expecting me." Something shifted slightly in Blair's expression. Not dramatically. She was too professional for that. But she glanced at the reception desk, then back at Reuben. "I can check if Mr. Fenn is available," she said, in the voice of someone fairly certain he wasn't. "In the meantime, is there something I can help you with?" "The part order. We arranged it last week." "Of course. What was the name?" "Carr." She typed something at the terminal, took a moment longer than necessary, and looked up. "I do see a notation. Let me track down someone in parts for you." "While you wait," she gestured vaguely at the showroom floor, "feel free to take a look around." What she meant, and what Reuben understood she meant, was that she was redirecting him to the parts counter and away from the sales floor. He registered it. He did not say anything about it. He nodded once, and Clem looked up from her book, and they walked further into the showroom while Blair went to the desk. In the center of the showroom, on a raised platform, was a Hartwell GTR series, Meridian's flagship model. Deep navy blue, long bonneted, the kind of car that announced itself by being completely quiet about it. Reuben stood in front of it with his thermos and looked at it the way a person looks at something they know from the inside. "Is that the one you worked on?" Clem asked, not looking up from the birds. "One like it," he said. "Different year." She looked at it briefly. It's pretty. It's a good car. She went back to the book. Across the showroom, Blair was speaking in a low voice to one of the junior staff. She nodded in Reuben's direction twice. The junior staff member, a young man who could not have been more than 22, and who had the round, open face of someone who had not yet learned to hide what he was thinking, looked over at Reuben and then immediately looked away. Reuben saw it. He did not react to it. What Blair had decided privately in the space between walking Reuben to the showroom and returning to the desk was that he had the part order, fine, that was legitimate, but that she was not going to spend the morning walking a man in a Carhartt jacket through the features of a $140,000 vehicle. She had a couple coming back at 11 who were genuinely buying. She had priorities. She had also not considered what would happen in the 7 minutes before Douglas Fenn appeared. Clem had drifted away from the GTR platform and was now standing beside one of the other vehicles, a silver coupe with its door open for display. She did what 9-year-olds do in proximity to open car doors, which was to climb in and sit down. Blair crossed the showroom floor in about 10 seconds. "Sweetheart," she said. And her voice had the particular tension of professional friendliness under strain. "I'm going to need you to hop out of that one. These ones aren't for sitting in, okay? They're for looking." Clem looked at her. Then she looked at Reuben. Reuben turned. He had been reading the placard on the GTR's platform. He walked over slowly, not quickly, and stood beside the silver coupe. "She's with me," he said. Blair looked at him. "I understand that, but we do ask that guests not sit in the display vehicles. It's standard." "It's a company policy?" Reuben said. "It's our standard for display models, yes." "The door's open," Reuben said, his voice still even, conversational almost. "The interior is the selling point of this trim level. You'd typically want a potential buyer to sit in it." Blair looked at him for a moment. "Miss Ashton," he said. He'd read her name card without making a thing of it. "Is there a genuine policy against a customer's child sitting in a display vehicle with an open door? Or is there some other reason you'd like her to get out?" The question landed in the silence between them and stayed there. Blair's jaw tightened. "Mr. Carr." "Mr. Carr, I don't think we need to." "I don't either," he said, "so let's not." He said it the way someone says something that closes a door politely but completely. His voice had not changed in volume or tone even once. He looked at Clem, who had watched the whole exchange with those still observant eyes. "You can stay there for a minute," he told her. He looked back at the placard. Blair stood very still. Then she walked back toward the reception desk. And that was when Douglas Fenn appeared. Douglas Fenn was 55 years old, had been in the automotive industry for 31 years, and had the particular quality of someone who had seen enough of the business that very little surprised him anymore. He came out of the corridor at the back of the showroom at a half walk, and when he saw Reuben standing in front of the GTR display, his face broke into the expression of a man who had been looking forward to something. "Reuben," he said. He said it the way you say the name of someone you're genuinely glad to see. "Doug," Reuben said, and they shook hands. "I wasn't sure if you'd make the drive up from Hartwell on a weekday." Douglas glanced at Clem. "And who's this?" "That's Clem." Douglas leaned slightly toward the car. "Hello, Clem." "Hello," Clem said. She was still holding the bird book. "There are 22 species of warbler in Ontario." Douglas blinked. "Is that right?" 23, if you count the yellow-breasted chat, but my book says that one's disputed." "Your book is right to be cautious," Douglas said seriously. He straightened and looked at Reuben. "Chip off the old block." "Her mother's curiosity," Reuben said quietly. "Not with grief exactly, more with the particular steadiness of someone who has learned to carry a thing so long that they carry it without showing it." Douglas nodded once, understanding something in that, and moved on. "Let me show you what came in from the Brampton facility. I had them hold it specifically for you." He started toward the parts corridor, then paused and looked back across the showroom at Blair, who was standing at the desk, watching the scene with an expression that had gone very still. "Has Blair been taking care of you?" he asked, the question deliberately even. "We met," Reuben said. "Nothing more." Douglas looked at Blair for a moment. Then he looked at Reuben. "Come on through," he said. Blair stood at the reception desk and did not move for a full 30 seconds. She was running the last 20 minutes backward in her head and arriving in pieces at something she had not finished arriving at yet but could already feel the shape of. She had not known who he was. That was the fact she kept circling. She hadn't known. But the version of events playing in her mind, the jacket, the boots, the decision she'd made in 4 seconds, that version was becoming harder to hold in a neutral light. She looked at the wall beside the showroom entrance. She had walked past it 100 times. There was a framed display there, the kind of corporate installation that blends into a space so thoroughly it becomes invisible. Awards, certifications, a timeline of engineering achievements. In the center of the display, under the heading Canadian Automotive Engineering Excellence, a photograph. A man maybe 2 or 3 years younger than he looked now, standing in what appeared to be a testing facility, holding an award. Dark circles under his eyes, the look of someone who had just finished something enormous. His name printed in a small caption beneath it. Reuben Carr, Lead Design Engineer, Drivetrain Architecture GTR Series. Blair looked at the photograph for a long time. Reuben came back out 40 minutes later with the part boxed under one arm. Clem walked beside him with her bird book and a small laminated card Douglas had given her. A technical spec sheet for the GTR that Douglas had described as the cheat sheet, and which she was already reading with the focus of someone preparing for an exam. At the reception desk, Blair was standing, not looking at a screen, just standing. "Mr. Carr," she said. He stopped. She had been forming this sentence for the last 40 minutes, since she had walked to the wall and stood in front of that photograph and understood, fully and without softening, what she had done. "I owe you an apology," she said. Her voice was not entirely steady. She had not expected that. "The way I spoke to you when you came in, I made an assumption. I made several." She stopped, started again. "I was wrong." She looked at Clem. At Clem, not at Reuben. "What I said to you about the car, you hadn't done anything wrong. I was rude to you, and you didn't deserve that." Clem looked at her with those serious, unhurried eyes. "Okay," Clem said, and then after a brief pause, "The spec sheet says the engine has 642 horsepower. My dad helped design it." Something moved across Blair's face. The specific movement of something, finally, fully landing. "I know," she said quietly. "I know he did." Clem nodded, apparently satisfied with this, and looked back at the spec sheet. Reuben looked at Blair for a moment, not with anger. More like someone who has been in enough rooms where people made fast judgments about him to recognize the specific look of someone who'd just caught themselves doing it and didn't quite know what to do with that recognition yet. "It happens," he said, and he meant it, and somehow that made it worse. He and Clem walked out into the September morning. What neither of them knew, not Reuben, not Blair, not Douglas Fenn standing near the parts corridor reviewing the next day's schedule, was that a man named Gary Tulloch had been sitting in Meridian's service waiting lounge for the better part of an hour, his truck in for a recall repair, watching the showroom through the glass partition with the absent interest of someone who had nothing better to do. Somewhere around the moment, Blair crossed the floor toward Clem and the silver coupe. Gary had taken out his phone. He filmed for 11 minutes. He sent it to his daughter first, the way people do. She watched it twice and called him. He argued with her for most of the drive home, and by the time he pulled into his driveway in Barton, she had already won. He posted it that evening. His caption read, "Watched this happen at a car dealership today. Man came in with his kid to pick up a part. Saleswoman spent the whole time treating him like he was lost. The car on the display? He designed it. Judge for yourself." No hashtags, no call to share. He was a private man, and it showed. By midnight, it had 400,000 views. By the time Gary woke up, his phone had stopped trying to notify him individually about things. Blair found out at 6 in the morning. Not because she woke up at 6. She hadn't slept. Her friend Mara sent 3 question marks at 5:58, and when Blair opened the link, she sat on the edge of her bed and watched herself cross a showroom floor toward a 9-year-old girl in a red quilted vest, and she watched her own face, and she did not like what she saw on it. Not the words. The face, the expression, the particular efficiency of her dismissal. She watched it again. It did not get easier to watch. Her regional manager called at 7. then the dealership's communications line, then her mother, who had seen it shared in a community group and said only, "Blair, what happened there?" The question was not angry. It was the question her mother had asked her whole life gently when she'd done something small and certain that turned out to be neither. She had spent 32 years being confident in her reads. She'd built a career on the ability to size up a situation quickly and respond accordingly. Speed was a skill. She'd believed that. But sitting in her apartment at 7 in the morning, she was beginning to understand the distance between speed and accuracy, and that she had spent a long time assuming they were the same thing. She wrote the statement herself. She did not involve the dealership's communications team. She sat at her kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote and crossed out and wrote again, the way you write something when you keep catching yourself trying to protect something instead of just saying the true thing. It went up through her personal account 2 days after the video. It said she had made an assumption, not in vague terms, in specific ones. She named what she had seen, the jacket, the boots, the little girl, and she named what she had decided because of it, and she named what was wrong with the deciding. She said she did not intend the word mistake to mean something accidental, because it wasn't accidental. It was fast and unconsidered, and built on a habit she hadn't examined, and she intended to examine it now. She said she was specifically sorry to Clem. That paragraph was the one she rewrote 4 times. The statement got shared more widely than the video. Not because it was dramatic, it wasn't. Because it didn't read like anything other than what it was. Reuben read it in his garage on a Thursday afternoon, standing at his workbench with the part he'd driven 90 minutes each way to pick up sitting in a parts tray beside the engine he was rebuilding. Clem was at school. The garage was quiet, except for the radio playing something low from the shelf above the tool cabinet. A classic rock station out of Owen Sound that he'd been listening to since before he could remember what he used to listen to. He read it once. Then he went back and read the part about Clem. He stood at the workbench for a while after that, not moving. There was grease on his hands again. There was always grease on his hands. It used to drive Joanna gently crazy, the way it never quite came out no matter what he used, and she'd bought him 4 different hand cleaners over the years in the spirit of scientific inquiry, and none of them worked, and eventually they had simply accepted it as a permanent feature of their life together. He thought about that sometimes. The small agreements you make with a person over years that become the texture of everything. You don't know you're making them until they're gone. He put the phone down. He picked up a wrench. He worked for another hour. Lorraine, who ran the parts desk at the auto supply in town and had known Reuben since before he'd moved back to Hartwell, had texted him twice about the video. His old colleague Weston, from his years at the engineering facility in Windsor, had called. Clem's teacher had sent a careful, kind email. The school principal had apparently watched the whole thing during his lunch break. Reuben had said the same thing to all of them, that he was fine, that Clem was fine, that it was over. What he hadn't said to any of them was the part that stayed with him, which was not Blair Ashton specifically, not the showroom specifically, but the 9 minutes between walking in the door and Douglas Fenn appearing. The 9 minutes in which Clem had stood beside him and read her bird book and climbed into a car and been spoken to as though she was a problem to manage. She smiled at her desk and had done all of this with the composure of a child who has spent enough time with a calm parent to have learned something from that calm without being old enough to name what she's learned. He thought about what he'd said to her on the drive home, when she'd finally looked up from the spec sheet long enough to ask why that woman had been so strange. She saw the jacket, he'd said, and decided she already knew the rest. Clem had considered this. That's not very efficient, she'd said, perhaps the most Clem possible response, and he had laughed for the first time that day. But that night, after she was in bed, he'd sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and thought about the less funny version of it. The version where Clem was a few years older and had understood more of what she'd seen. The version where the thing a grown woman had done in that showroom had installed itself in some part of his daughter's understanding of how she might expect to be treated in rooms like that. He thought about what he was building quietly against that, what he said, what he showed her, whether it was enough. He didn't know if it was enough. He kept trying anyway. The mentorship announcement happened 4 weeks later, not because of the video exactly, but not entirely apart from it either. It had been forming for 2 years, a program for young mechanics and automotive technicians in small towns across southern Ontario. Kids who were good with engines and had no pathway into formal engineering training, who were building skills in their father's garages and their uncle's shops with no one to tell them those skills were the beginning of something larger. Reuben had been writing notes about it in a folder on his desk since the year Joanna died, when he'd moved back to Hartwell with a 4-year-old and a grief he didn't know what to do with, and had started working with his hands again as a way of remembering how to exist in a day. He had always said he'd launch it when the time was right. He'd said this for 2 years. The attention that came after the video made him less patient with that reasoning. He made 3 calls. He drove to Barton twice. He met with a contact at the provincial trades program on a Wednesday morning and walked out with a letter of intent. The announcement went out through the garage's modest social media page. 1 paragraph, a photograph of the shop, and the text: applications open for the Hartwell Automotive Mentorship Fund, for young people in small communities who are good with their hands and haven't had a door opened yet. He had not expected it to travel. It traveled. Blair Ashton sent him an email 2 weeks later, not through the dealership. Through the garage's contact form at the bottom of the website, the one he'd set up 3 years ago, and almost never checked. He almost missed it. The email said she wasn't writing to ask for anything. She had read about the mentorship program, and she thought it was exactly the kind of thing that needed to exist, and she knew she had no standing to say so, but she wanted to say it anyway. She said she had spent the last 3 weeks doing she should have done earlier. Listening to the people who worked around her, actually listening, asking what they'd been afraid to say, finding out what she'd been getting wrong. She said she was better at reading rooms than she was at reading people, and that she had assumed for a long time those were the same skill. She was working on the difference. Reuben read it at the workbench, standing in his jacket, the November cold coming in under the garage door because the seal on the south side needed replacing and he hadn't gotten to it yet. He read it once and wrote back the same day, which surprised him a little. He wrote, "The program is real. If you know anyone who should apply, send them the link. I appreciate you saying what you said. It matters when people do that." That was all. He did not make it larger than it was, and he did not make it smaller. Clem came in from school at 4:15, let herself in through the side door the way she always did on days. Reuben was working late and dropped her backpack on the chair by the wall where it always went. "There's a warbler at the feeder," she said. Not a greeting, more a continuation of something she'd been thinking about on the walk home. "Which one?" Reuben said from under the car. "Orange-crowned, I think. But they're not usually here this late in the year. Could be a straggler." She considered this seriously. "I looked it up. Sometimes they stay if the food is good." Reuben rolled out from under the frame and sat up. He looked at her. She was wearing the red vest again, over a sweater now, her hair pulled back in a way that had started the morning neat and had accumulated the particular untidiness of a full school day. "Good day?" he said. "Medium. We had a substitute in science who didn't know what centrioles were, which was awkward." "Awkward for him or for you?" "For everyone," she said diplomatically. He wiped his hands on the rag, which did approximately nothing, and stood up. "Dad," she said. "Yeah." "At the car place." She was looking at the wall of tools, not at him, the way she sometimes did when she was actually working through something. "That woman. Was she a bad person?" He had been waiting for this question, or something like it, since the drive home from Barton. He had been waiting for the version of it that would require the true answer. "No," he said, without hesitating, because he meant it. "She made a fast decision about us that wasn't fair, and when she understood what she'd done, she told the truth about it." He paused. "That's not what bad people do. Bad people don't tell the truth about themselves." Clem thought about this. "So she made a bad choice." "Yeah. But she's not bad." "Those are different things," he said. "People mix them up a lot." She nodded slowly, filing that somewhere. "Were you mad?" she asked. He'd been expecting that one too. "A little," he said, because she was 9 and sharp and would know if he said otherwise. Mostly for you. I wasn't that mad, Clem said. I was more. She searched for it, puzzled. He looked at her. That's actually the more useful one to be. She seemed to accept this. She picked her backpack up. Is there food? There's pasta. Again? You like pasta. I like variety, she said, and took herself inside. Reuben stood in the garage for a moment after the door closed. The tools on the wall, the engine on the stand, the part he'd driven 90 minutes each way to pick up, sitting in the tray, doing what it was made to do, which was wait to be used for the right thing. Outside, the November evening was settling in the way evenings did in Hartwell in autumn, without ceremony, the light going the particular way it went over the open stretch of the county road past the property line, gray and quiet and honest. He thought about what he'd told Clem on the drive back from Barton. She sees the jacket and decides she knows the rest. He had said it calmly because he had been calm. Not because it hadn't cost him anything. He had been tired that day and a little short on patience, and the drive back was 90 minutes of turning over what a grown woman had decided in 4 seconds about his daughter. But Clem had been sitting beside him with the spec sheet in her hands, reading about horsepower, and he had looked at her and he had chosen, one more time, the same choice he kept making, what she would see from him. He turned off the garage light. He went inside and put the pasta on. Outside, the warbler, if it was a warbler, was still at the feeder, doing what stragglers do when they find somewhere worth staying a little longer than expected.